Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had OFA quirk. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Iris is dumb from AO3. So let's start the video. I want you to do something for me. I want you to imagine the perfect superhero story. Can you do that? Really take a minute for me. Close your eyes, picture what makes it perfect. Is it the powers? Is it the morals or methods of the hero? Is it the tragedy? No good superhero starts without a tragedy. Maybe it's how many people they save or how many they kill. There are a few people you probably thought about. Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne, Peter Parker, anyone from the golden age of comic books. All great choices. My story starts out a little different. Stop me if you've heard it before. A spunky kid with no superpowers grows up in a world where everyone has powers, only here they're called quirks. He's not exactly well liked, but he gets by. One day in middle school, he meets this amazing hero, and his whole life changes. By a stroke of luck, he gets offered the chance to be a torchbearer to the greatest superpower the world has ever seen, one for all. Through a hell of a lot of hard work and sheer determination, he gets a chance to attend UA High School. And 3 years later, he emerges to become the new #1 hero and saves the world from countless threats along the way. That's right, my name is 𝐬𝐬 𝐍𝐻𝐬, and I'm Japan's one and only All Might. For the past 18 years I've done it all. I saved the country. Went to America, saved the country again, made friends, saved the country a few dozen more times, made some unfortunate brand deals, and I may have gotten hurt and quit for a little while, but at the end of it all, I stayed on top. I've got a bunch of friends, a badass car, a cereal, a Christmas album, hundreds of action figures, an amazing burger joint, and a so-so popsicle. All in all, it's great to be me. After all, there's only one symbol of peace, and you're looking at him. The life of 16-year-old Izuku Midoriya was kind of boring, to be honest. Ever since he'd started high school, his life had calmed down a hell of a lot. For one thing, 𝐀𝐦 was off at UA, doing whatever heroes do, and Izuku had gone to a private high school on scholarship. His quirkless status still didn't make him any friends, but he was smart enough to justify being there, so everyone left him alone. Loneliness was a step up from torture, at least. His new school did a lot of things differently, including homework. They reasoned that in a professional setting, you're expected to get all of your work done in the office or during work hours, so they rarely assigned anything to be done at home. Although if students didn't finish their work, they would have to put in overtime and complete it at home. Being intelligent enough to get in on a scholarship, Izuku had little trouble finishing everything on time, usually taking the first 3 days of the month to finish all of the work and read all of the material so that he was able to use the rest of it as free time. For a while, he didn't know what to do with himself. Not getting into any hero school had thrown his plan for life completely off course, and it certainly didn't motivate him to go out searching for hero fights at all hours of the day and night. Walking around the city was always a comfort, though, and the decade of doing so meant he knew every inch of the city. As such, he'd taken to exploring much farther and more dangerous places than he'd ever dared to before. One such place was the abandoned tunnels used by the Musutafu subway system before it was shut down around 50 years ago. The entrance was creepy enough, with the stairs down to the platform covered in grass and dust, and it only got worse the deeper you went. Rats or other creatures suddenly scurrying by had made Izuku nearly piss himself far more times than he'd like to admit. But for some reason, he kept coming back. He'd found the entrance last month, and it had taken him a week to even get the courage to do more than peek in. There weren't any signs that other people ever ventured down there. That meant he was probably even crazier than the junkies who hung out around here. Great. Over the past couple of weeks, he'd begun to map out as much as he could. The city had never bothered to upload a map of the tunnels to any official website that wasn't designed for computers several times older than him, so he was forced to do it by hand. He started with the tunnels connected directly to the platform, then slowly branched out over time. He'd reached several dead ends and caved-in tunnels, but there was something that piqued his interest that he intended to explore tonight: a maintenance access tunnel. It would most likely only connect 2 or more tunnels he'd already mapped out, but what good was a map if it was incomplete? The familiar glow of the flashlight illuminated the westbound J line, periodically flicking down to the map in his notebook as he approached the spot he'd marked where he'd found the gate. It was tall, stretching up probably about 3 or 4 meters, and wrought iron. Thankfully, whatever idiot designed it put horizontal bars about every meter so that he had hand and footholds. How kind of them. Izuku rolled himself over the top, not able to extend himself upwards lest he hit the ceiling, and dropped down. He landed gracefully, stumbling and toppling backwards onto the cold concrete. Good thing there's no one but the rats to see that. A small series of squeaks came from a nearby corner that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Izuku pointed his flashlight at the judgmental rat and gave it his best glare as it scampered off into the darkness. After walking down the tunnel for a minute or so, he came to a large, open chamber. The walls were decrepit, crumbling, and covered in graffiti and spider webs. A section of the far wall was entirely crumbled away, with a dirt tunnel leading off into the inky black beyond. He couldn't shine his flashlight far enough to see what was on the other end. What in the hell? He muttered to himself. As he was about to pull out his notebook and update his map before continuing on, a noise echoed from the tunnel that sounded like a faint explosion. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 stopped and tilted his head to listen for a moment, and then a whirring hum began to reach his ears. It grew and grew until he could swear it was shaking the chamber. Bricks rattled in their decayed mortar and a cloud of dust rained down from the ceiling. Scratch that, it was shaking the chamber. Now, there was no way he couldn't find out what was producing the hum. Screw whatever advice the cats may have about that. He trekked down the tunnel, noticing it was sloping downwards. What on earth could be inside the mysterious death hole inside a maintenance tunnel in an abandoned subway? This was definitely the start to some kind of horror movie. And 𝐬𝐻𝐸 was the poor idiot who accidentally discovers, unleashes the monster and dies in the very first scene, but he was fine with that. At least it'd be exciting. The hum grew and grew, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 could swear it was vibrating every bone in his body. The closer he got, the more it started to hurt. Then, all of a sudden, another explosion, sounding much closer this time, echoed down the tunnel and the humming stopped. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 covered his ears and slammed his eyes shut, but the cave didn't collapse. Slowly, he opened one eye, then the other, and removed his hands from his ears. More faint sounds of destruction were coming from the end, which he realized that he could indeed now see. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 runs down the tunnel and emerges into some kind of control room. It's illuminated in some kind of pulsing and color-changing glow, and oh god, there's a body of someone in a lab coat lying on the floor. He rushes over and checks the man's pulse. It's faint, but it's there. The man moans in pain, barely audible over the crashing and shouting coming from behind the window. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 looks up to see two gargantuan beams of some kind of plasma colliding in the center of some kind of giant chamber. Inside the chamber, there's also some kind of guy covered in hands fighting. Holy shit, that's 𝐬𝐻𝐸. What the hell is he doing down here? Clearly he's stopping whatever evil plot is going on. But what is going on? The guy covered in hands hasn't landed a hit, but it looks like 𝐬𝐻𝐸 really doesn't want to let him. He's taking care to dodge every single attack and maintain his distance. The handy man goes for a big swipe and overextends just a bit too far. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 rears back for a punch, and he gets blown away with a loud thump. The shockwave is so strong it shatters the control room windows and sends 𝐬𝐻𝐸 tumbling onto his butt. The source of the attack is a man in a nice suit, with some kind of terrifying Darth Vader mask. All for one, I figured you were behind this, old friend. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 shouts at the villain from the crater he made in the side of the chamber. He gets into a crouching position and launches himself at the man in the suit, presumably all for one. And I knew you just couldn't help but to be here, 𝐬𝐻𝐸. The response is somewhat teasing, but the man's voice still sends an intense shiver down 𝐬𝐻𝐸's spine. All for one simply raises his hand and releases another shockwave, stopping 𝐬𝐻𝐸 mid-air and sending him careening into the supports for the control room. Whoa, whoa, whoa. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 cries as everything begins to tip violently forward. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had been getting up for another attack, but pauses and whips his head towards the sound of the voice. It sounded like a kid, for goodness sake. In a flash, the hero is scooping up 𝐬𝐻𝐸 and dashing out of the falling structure. The two land on some scaffolding and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sets the boy down. I don't know why you're here, but this area is dangerous, young man. I suggest you leave immediately. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 crouches and takes off again before 𝐬𝐻𝐸 can finish shouting wait. Well, this sucks. How the hell is he supposed to get out of here? Kaboom! A massive explosion snatches his attention and he sees 𝐬𝐻𝐸 attempting to grapple with his adversary on top of the massive machine. Before he can shout a warning, the guy covered in hands dashes towards the hero and plants his hands on 𝐬𝐻𝐸's side. He cries out in pain and disengages, swatting the hand villain away. All for one takes the opportunity to hit 𝐬𝐻𝐸 with his now grotesque and oversized arm. The attack catches 𝐬𝐻𝐸's other side and sends him flying back towards 𝐬𝐻𝐸. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 crashes into the bottom of the scaffolding and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 has to scramble not to get crushed. The hero isn't so lucky. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hears horrible, wet coughing and scampers over to where 𝐬𝐻𝐸 is pinned. Gaping wounds are open on both sides of the man's abdomen, and his legs are pinned under what must be a ton of rubble. Shit, he coughs out, inspecting the wounds. He knows it's grim. There's no realistic way he makes it out of here alive. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hears rapidly accelerating breathing coming from next to him, and he sees the green-haired child he saved. He won't make it out of here alive, but one for all just might live on. Listen, he's interrupted by another coughing fit. Listen to me, young man. I'm about to give you something. Something important. Take it. Use it. Defeat him. Do what I couldn't. He plucks a long, golden strand of hair and places it in the boy's hand. He starts to pull back, clearly confused, but Toshinori's hand snaps out and grabs his wrist, coughing violently. Don't cough, don't tell anyone. No one can know. It has to be you. I'm sorry. Well, what are you saying? The boy chokes out, voice quivering. 𝗧𝗏 squeezes his hand tighter. What you hold there has been passed down like a sacred torch. It may be too much for you, I don't know, but you need to keep it safe. It's the only way. Only you will have the power to defeat him now. Eat it, quickly. I don't eat it. 𝗧𝗏 screams. He's sorry, but he needs to make sure it escapes safely. The boy shrinks away from him, but complies. He balls up the hair a bit and gulps it down, disgusted. And now what? 𝗧𝗏 sighs in relief. It will take time, but it's officially yours now. Now, you must leave. Escape with your life. Don't worry about me. 𝗧𝗏 summons every ounce of strength left in his body, and he begins to lift the rubble off him as it groans and creaks under the stress. Go, he shouts. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 crawls away and begins to stumble into a run. Looking for a way out as All Might lifts the rubble enough to escape. He coughs again and falls to one knee. He looks really badly injured, but he does rise to his feet, although shakily. What did he give 𝐬𝐻𝐸? What was so important about eating his hair that would defeat this all-for-one that he also couldn't tell another soul about? The sound of All Might launching into the air again sounds from behind him, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 looks back to see the hero flying up, but he's off course. He's not on target to attack the villains. He's going to hit 𝗀𝐻𝐸. He's aiming to destroy whatever terrifying machine they've built. No, all-for-one screams, panicked, but it's too late. All Might screams out one final SMASH as his fist collides with the structure and the beams begin to destabilize. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 picks up the pace, running faster and faster until he's in a dead sprint, nearly tripping over himself with every step as he tries to climb back out of the destroyed control center to the subway tunnels. By some miracle, he makes it back to the dirt cave and rushes out. He doesn't even slow down to grab his backpack because he can hear footsteps behind him. Hey, kid, get back here. The voice is raspy, high-pitched. It's not all-for-one, must be the hand guy that was with him. He ripped open a hole in All Might's side just by touching him. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 does not want to find out how. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 clicks off his flashlight, relying on his memory of the tunnels to get him back to the surface. A few minutes later, he crashes out and up the steps, still in a dead sprint heading for downtown. Thank God for 𝐀𝐦 and all his other bullies loving to chase him. He's a bona fide track star by this point. Unfortunately, so is Handyman. The guy is freakishly fast, and he's starting to gain on 𝐬𝐻𝐸. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 takes a sharp right down an alleyway and another onto the sidewalk of a busy downtown street. The guy is still gaining on him, nimbly dodging all of the pedestrians as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 just barrels through the crowd. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 approaches a crosswalk, and the walk sign is red. A taxi screeches to a halt to slow, right in front of him, but he jumps and flips over it, landing in a crouch. Okay, that was cool, but how in the hell did he manage that? With how much of a twig he is, adrenaline shouldn't even be able to get him 3 meters into the air. There's no time to question it, though, as a large box truck stops right in front of the guy with the hands, and he isn't as lucky as 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hears him ram into it with an OOMF. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 takes off again and turns down several alleys and climbs up a convenient fire escape next to a dumpster. He falls to his hands and knees and tries to catch his breath, heaving out and sucking and wheezing gasps of air. What the fuck was that? He found some horror movie tunnel of doom, which actually led him to find a barely alive scientist and watching All Might fight a man in a 3-piece suit and a man covered in hands atop their giant laser beam machine of death. Then, they nearly killed All Might and All Might made him eat a piece of hair. And then he did a flip over a car. As he thinks it through, the reality hits him. They killed All Might. There was no way he got out of there, even if he beat them somehow, which the hand villain chasing him was a clear sign that he did not. There was no possible way he wouldn't have bled out long before help arrived. A mangled sob escapes 𝐬𝐻𝐸's throat as he clutches at his chest and touches his head to the roof. All Might is dead. His hero is dead. And his last act was to pass on some kind of secret to useless, quirkless 𝐬𝐻𝐸. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 woke up in his own bed. He honestly doesn't remember going home. The entirety of last night was a blur. Man, that was one hell of a dream. He'd have to write down 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hero's hair before he died to a guy in a Darth Vader mask and figure out what the hell it was supposed to mean later. He supposes he must have dozed off and had a nightmare somewhere in the tunnels and have woken up and gone home at some point. His mom would have freaked if he was mysteriously gone in the morning. He sits up in bed, yawning and stretching. Well, that's odd. His shirt feels a lot tighter than it used to. It's not like he's wearing a kid's shirt, but it was never this snug. He looks down to see if he put on the wrong shirt or it shrunk or something. It's the one he remembers putting on before going out last night, for sure. Plain white with the word T-shirt on it in plain text. But surely it must have shrunk, because it's hugging his chest and arms. The muscles almost look like they're going to bust a seam and poke through. Wait, muscles? What the shit? Why is he ripped? 𝐬𝐻𝐸 surveys his arms and torso. The muscles, which he is somehow able to inspect through his shirt, are chiseled to perfection. He flexes his bicep experimentally and prods it with his finger. It feels like poking a hunk of iron. There's no way he isn't still dreaming. What the hell does a waking up ripped after dreaming about Darth Vader dream mean? Izuku, honey, come out here, sweetie, you need to see this. His mother calls out from the living room. Izuku moves to his closet to change into a bigger shirt and rips the door off its hinges. What was that? She yells, sounding more than panicked at this point. Oh, nothing. Just fell off the bed. I'm fine. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? What the Izuku quickly throws on a larger shirt and hurries to his bedroom door before pausing. He gingerly places his thumb and pointer finger on the handle and turns it as gently as he can. Gratefully, it doesn't explode. What a weird dream. He walks out into the hall and rounds the corner to see what his mother was trying to show him. Yeah, Mom, what's you know? Please, God, don't let this be real. All Might discovered dead in underground facility this morning sprawls across the bottom of the television screen. The reporter is doing her best to stay composed, but Izuku can hear her voice breaking. Around 6 a.m. today, authorities were investigating the source of the strange tremors that have plagued Musutafu for the past few weeks. When they drilled through the ground, the investigative teams found the body of All Might, heavily injured, inside a massive underground facility. The #1 hero was pronounced dead on arrival due to blood loss. It is speculated that he died putting an end to a massive machine believed to have been causing the tremors. She takes in a shaky breath to regain her composure, fighting against a sob. The entire nation, no, the entire world is in shock at this news. A service is being held in Musutafu Square this afternoon by All Might's associates. But no one is sure how to move forward without our beloved symbol of peace. I'm sorry. At that, she can't hold it in anymore and breaks down crying. The station quickly cuts the audio and scrambles to change the scene. Izuku just stands in shock. He pinches himself. Hard. It hurts. All Might is dead. He pinches again, harder. It still hurts. He thinks he knows why he woke up with muscles, why he ripped his closet door off its hinges with zero effort. A third pinch. If he pinches any harder, he'd tear a chunk out of his arm. Oh God, it was real. Izuku stands out in the cold December wind. The massive crowd surrounding him helps to block it, but nothing has been able to warm the icy numbness in his limbs all day. 𝗀𝗏𝐻𝐸 stands in front of the city hall, giving a speech. He hasn't been paying attention. How long has he been standing here? And in all of our greatest hours of need, he would turn to us. That was who he was. All Might was not a symbol, nor a god. He was just a person, a human being like any of us. He relied on others to see it through. I know that is exactly what he would ask of you all right now. Do what you can to help others. Help your neighbors. Help your friends. Help your family. He counted on each and every one of us every single day. Now, we must count on each other. Now, we must count on you. Should he contact 𝗀𝗏𝐻𝐸? He was All Might's former sidekick. After all, who would never believe some quirkless kid he'd never seen before who said that All Might made him eat his hair and he thinks that it somehow gave him his powers? Yeah, that would work. There was no one he could count on but himself. There was no one that everyone could count on but himself. They're all counting on me. The man next to him leans over and whispers, I don't think he meant you, specifically. It's kinda like a metaphor, you know. Izuku shoots him an annoyed look and shoves his way out of the crowd. He's careful not to put too much power into any of his movements. He's been walking on eggshells all day. What would happen if he accidentally shoved someone with the full strength of All Might? Izuku shakes the thought from his head as he begins to aimlessly wander the city. He couldn't stay in his house. There was nowhere to stay but his room, and he certainly wasn't going to do that. Every time he saw his hero's face, he felt the hair stuck in his throat all over again. He just had to get out. There wasn't a destination in mind. Just putting one foot in front of the other helped him think. With his mind preoccupied, his feet moved on autopilot for hours. Izuku briefly registered the places he was passing. Aldera, the subway entrance, the park he and Kaken played in as kids. His legs carried him further and further back in time until he stopped in front of a familiar building. Izuku looked up to see a generic office high-rise, no different than any of its neighbors. It wasn't the building itself that meant anything, but what happened on top of it a year and 10 months prior. The side door was unlocked, and it opened to a hallway that connected to the staircase. Several minutes of autopilot later, Izuku found himself shivering, looking out over the surrounding rooftops. This was the spot his dreams died. It wasn't the doctor's office, or the bridge, or Aldera, or even that facility underground. Right here, All Might told him he could never be a hero. He had sat against the railing in front of him for hours that day, debating with himself what to do. In the end, when Izuku felt himself on the pavement again, it was after climbing down the stairs. It almost hadn't been, but he refused to give up. He'd proved that he could make something of himself that day, even if that something wasn't destined to be a hero. A strong gust swept the dark thoughts from his mind, and his eyes began to focus on the world around him. The air was frigid and the skies were gray. He'd forgotten a jacket, but even so he felt something within him trying to warm him up. It felt like there was this concentrated point somewhere in his core just begging to pour out heat. Izuku allowed it to, and his eyes widened at the feeling. Adrenaline shot through his system like a shock, and everything got loud. Izuku quickly covered his ears from the noise. It sounded like every car within 10 blocks was honking directly in his ears. He tried to focus on dimming the flow of heat and the pain subsided. It was still so much louder than before, but it was manageable. The adrenaline subsides as well, and Izuku realizes just how tight he was holding his head. He walks over to the railing and loosens his hold on the flow of heat once more. The sounds of the city roar to life in his ears, but he bites his tongue and pushes through it. He clasps a hand around the bars and gives a tug. The rusted metal groans and snaps off. Whoa, that just confirms it. Whatever this thing in him is, it's from All Might. Did the man seriously manage to somehow pass on his strength? What kind of quirk even is that? A small creak from the loosened bars moving in the wind brings his attention back to the section of guardrail he ripped up. The building across the street is framed perfectly in the gap. Izuku takes a deep breath and hops up and down a couple times, redirecting the flow of heat into his legs. He steps up to the ledge and looks down, which is a mistake. He quickly steps back and just focuses on his target. He shakes out his arms and legs, silently begging them to stop trembling. He swears he can hear his bones rattling. It doesn't matter, though. He needs to do this. It's his first big leap. His first step towards doing what All Might chose him for. It's his first step on his journey to become a hero. Izuku starts running. He can feel the warmth flowing in his limbs, propelling him forward with more power than he's ever felt before. Then, pain. The feeling like a hot dagger pierces his skull and causes him to falter, as if his entire body were screaming at him, "Don't." In the next breath, Izuku is falling. His shoe was untied. By some miracle of luck or newfound reflexes, he manages to grab onto the ledge before he can tumble down to the concrete far below. He does nothing but hang there and breathe for what feels like a lifetime. He just almost died. What the hell is he doing? And what on earth was that feeling? It happened just before he tripped, and he hadn't consciously noticed his shoe was untied. Was it part of the power? It would certainly explain how All Might seemed to have such amazing reflexes. Izuku scrambles to pull himself back onto the roof and just sits down to finish hyperventilating. He's never doing that again. At least, not as his first step. Maybe his fifth. Some time later, as the sky has begun to darken, Izuku climbs down the stairs again and sets off, this time with somewhere to go. It's nighttime when Izuku comes upon the graveyard. The frosted-over gate squeaks with the noise of decades of neglect. Fresh snow crunches under his shoes as he makes his way to the center of the area. Gloom hangs in the air, slowly settling over him like a layer of cold snow. What is he doing here? He feels like he's being a bother, even to the dead. All Might must be rolling in his grave watching him fumble around like this. Fuck it, as long as he's here, he might as well try to seek some answers. He carefully steps around all of the bundles of flowers and picture frames and merch to stand in front of the headstone he came here to see. It's massive and golden, perfectly fitting for the man he can never hope to live up to. Izuku doesn't really know where to start. What do I do? How am I supposed to do what you asked of me? I can't stop the guy. I just don't know if I'm the person you should have given it to. The corpse of his hero doesn't answer, naturally. I can't do this by myself. Hey, kid. All of a sudden, he can feel a hand reach out and touch his shoulder. Panic and power floods his body as Izuku whirls around and snatches the owner's wrist. Warmth floods over his body and his heartbeat pounds in his ears. Green lightning crackles in the air and his eyes glow green in fury as he lets the heat wash over him entirely for the first time. He's been so pent up all day, so much fear and anger and anxiety sealed inside, that it all comes rushing out in an instant. All of the emotions come rushing forth, and the emerald electricity concentrates into his hands and arcs out at his unfortunate target with a loud 𝐍𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸𝐸 A dark tendril whips out from the man's arm and latches onto Izuku's torso, forcing him to faceplant into the snow as well. Oh God, oh no, no, no. Izuku gets up and rushes forward to check for a pulse. What did I do to him? The man's quirk is still attached to him, even though he's unconscious. He feels so bad. This guy was probably just trying to check up on the weird kid in a graveyard in the middle of the night and Izuku just electrocuted him. A bit of color catches his eye and Izuku lifts one side of the man's large, brown trench coat. The man is wearing a costume that looks suspiciously like All Might's. Is he a hero? Oh God, he just electrocuted a hero to death. Ugh, the man groans, which means he's alive, thankfully. Now, he's only assaulted a hero. The noise draws Izuku's attention to the man's face, and his heart stops. A feeling similar to what he felt on the rooftop pierces his head again. But it feels like two dissonant pitches that swiftly harmonize with each other. Staring down at an older version of his own face, Izuku asks aloud, "Who are you?" "All right, people, let's do this one last time. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and for the last 22 years, I thought I was the one and only symbol of peace. I'm pretty sure you know the rest. I saved the world, fell in love, got married, saved the world some more, maybe too much. My marriage got testy. I made some dicey money choices. Don't invest in an All Might themed restaurant. Trust me. It was shut down for hundreds of incidents of hair getting in the food. Then, like 15 years pass. Blah, 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 super boring. I broke my back. A drone flew into my face. I buried my mom, my wife and I. Split up. But I handled it like a champ. Izuku cries himself to sleep every night and lives in a crappy apartment. Because no matter how many times I get hit, I always get back up. And I got a lot of time to reflect and work on myself. Did you know that penguins mate for life? Can you imagine? A penguin seeing another penguin and then making it work. She wanted kids and it scared me. And I didn't take enough care of myself and I think I scared her. I'm pretty sure I broke her heart. The phone starts to ring but Izuku just presses the end call button. He just can't bring himself to do it. Flash forward. I'm in my apartment doing push-ups, doing ab crunches, getting lean when this weird thing happens. I gotta say, weird things happen to me a lot, but this was really weird. Izuku's gut sags a bit as he removes his costume and opens a pizza box. He's lying on his bed chowing down, just watching some TV, when a portal opens up on his ceiling. It starts to suck him in and he tries to use Black Whip to anchor himself, but it just rips up the floorboards and he gets sucked through. Izuku spasms in pain as he flies through a beautiful scene of stars and interconnected things that look like branches made of light. Another portal approaches in the distance, and as he passes through it, it spits him out onto the streets of Musutafu, not very gently, might he add. I was in Japan but things were different. Also, All Might was dead, and younger, and kind of perfect. It was like looking in a mirror. The name of a popular soda brand flashes on a billboard, but it's spelled very differently. The screen next to it is playing the news report about All Might's death. Izuku stares up at the pristine, young, smiling picture of All Might with his own sunken, tired, unshaven, and quite bruised face. I have a feeling the thing that brought me here was the thing that got him killed. You want to know what happened next? Hey, kid. 𝐍𝐶𝐍𝐶𝐍𝐶, who are you? Me, too. Hey, what are you doing over there? A deep voice shouts. Izuku whips his head around to see it came from a pair of police officers approaching with flashlights in hand. Freeze, Musutafu PD. Izuku puts his hands up for a moment, then turns and tries to run. 𝐬𝐿. He gets yanked backwards as the weird energy tendril thing is still attached to his torso. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. He scrambles back and starts to drag the man who looks like him's unconscious body away. Stop, stop. The other officer calls out. Hey, drop the body. Izuku floods warmth into his body once more, and the green lightning appears again. He jumps into the air with the man on his back. Haha, see ya, officers. Then, he feels another tug as the tendril gets caught on the raw iron fence and stretches before violently flinging him and the man back towards the graveyard. Oh, come on. They nearly collide with the officers and end up slamming into the wall of the church in the graveyard. The officers rush over with lights pointed at him and guns drawn. All right, kid, put him up. Izuku complies, and the man's other hand whips out another tendril that latches onto a passing truck. By WOAH. Izuku is dragged through the air behind the homeless hero as the truck speeds along, the driver having clearly not noticed. He also seems to hold no regard for the speed limit because there is no way they should be going this fast. Other cars honk as the truck rushes past and they slam into several of them. Izuku manages to reel himself up to hang onto the man's body, but he still can't control them at all. He accidentally causes them to do several barrel rolls and the man's face scrapes along the street. Sorry, all units, be advised. It looks like we have a child in a t-shirt dragging a homeless corpse behind a truck. Sirens begin to wail behind them and a cop car skids onto the road to follow the truck. The man stirs and looks back at Izuku. Who whoops? Yes, I didn't kill you. Who are you? The man shouts, not happy about his current situation. Who are you? Izuku retorts. The homeless man can get his answers when he tells Izuku why he has his face. Why are you trying to kill me? I'm not. I'm trying to save you. The man's head collides with a street lamp as soon as the words leave his mouth. Doing a great job of that so far, Izuku. The pair collide with several mailboxes in the side of a bus before the truck finally stops at a red light. That makes one road law the drivers followed so far. The two tumble onto the pavement and skid, roll into the crosswalk in front of the truck, both groaning in pain. The man's consciousness now seems to fade completely, and the tendrils evaporate, leaving the two laying in a crosswalk. Everyone else simply goes around them. Thanks, Musutafu. At an abandoned gym elsewhere in the city, the homeless man stirs. He's tied to a punching bag with whatever bungee cords and rope were lying around. His eyes take a moment to focus before they settle on Izuku, and he tilts his head and winces. Huh, you're like me. Izuku just stares at him, trying to seem calm and unimpressed. I have questions. The man just grunts and struggles aggressively at his bonds, shaking and spinning the punching bag. The sudden movement and primal grunts of effort cause Izuku to flinch and shrink away, but the man seems unable to escape. He gives up after a minute and the punching bag continues to spin around slowly. Why do you look like me? The man stretches his toes to the ground and maneuvers the bag back around so that he can face his captor. Because I am you. Well, that's just so helpful right now. Then why aren't you my age? And why is your face like that? And why is your body? Izuku looks at the man's gut poking through the bungee cords. A different shape. The man huffs. Pretty sure you just called me fat. No. Hey, you don't look so hot either, kid. Most superheroes don't hang out in graveyards zapping people. Are you a ghost here to show me the true meaning of Christmas? No. A robot sent here from the future to kill me? No. He sounds increasingly exasperated at each successive question. Am I a robot from the future? Now you're not even close. Are you from another dimension? Like a parallel universe where things are like this universe but different. And you're a hero in that universe and you somehow traveled to this universe but you don't know how. The man stares at him, dumbfounded. That was really just a guess. I like physics, quantum theory. Homeless Izuku corrects. This is amazing. You can teach me to be a hero just like All Might said I could be. This could be his chance. He could get this sad, old version of him to help him beat All for One like All Might asked before he died. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Sarcasm drips from homeless Izuku's voice like honey. Izuku scowls at him. Look, I made a promise to him. Homeless Izuku spins around again. Alright, well here's lesson 1, kid. Don't watch the mouth. Watch the hands. From behind the punching bag, he sticks his arms out and wiggles his fingers. Then he kicks the bag into Izuku and starts towards the window. He opens it and crouches on the windowsill for a moment, then sighs. Trust me, kid, this'll all make you a better hero. He jumps out and whips out one of those tendrils, then cries out in pain. All around him, the air seems to glitch and fill with dark green lightning, kind of like what Izuku produced earlier, except this somehow seems more wild and panicked. Izuku rushes to the window to see homeless Izuku catch himself on the fire escape and swinging himself onto a lower story. He tries to catch his breath but then starts spasming again. AGH, are you okay? No, I'm not. I don't think my body is very happy about being in the wrong dimension. AGGGHH. He stands up and takes a deep breath. Look, I'm not looking for a side gig as a hero coach. I got a lot going on in my dimension, like a lot. He waves his hand dismissively up at Izuku. Izuku decides that if this is a version of him, he can appeal to him. He pulls out one of his favorite quotes from All Might growing up. It's sure to win himself over. With great power comes great. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it. Homeless Izuku points and glares at Izuku to interrupt him, then tries to jump into the air again and has another spasm, falling further down the fire escape. Want my advice? Go back to being a regular kid. I don't have a choice. All for One's got a super collider. He's trying to kill me. Homeless Izuku seems completely uninterested, but then he looks up with wide eyes. Wait a second, what did you just say? All for One wants me dead. Who cares about that? Where's the collider? Outskirts of town, under the old subway tunnels. Homeless Izuku drops down into the alley and starts walking away. Hey, where are you going? When it runs again, I'll just jump in and get back to my life. Wait, you can't let them run it again. I'm supposed to destroy it so it never runs again. Or everyone's gonna die. Or everyone's gonna die. That's what they always say. But there's always a little bit of time before everybody dies. And that's when I do my best work, so gimme whatever thingamabob you've got so I can go home. Ooh, what? Your goober or whatever. There's always some kind of override key or access key or terminal key to these big dumb machines. I always mix them up, so I just call it a goober or a gizmo or what have you. I never got one. All Might didn't give it to me. Oh, god damn it. Now I have to steal it from All for One. He starts walking away again, swearing under his breath about having to break into somewhere. Izuku starts following him out of the alley. If I don't turn that collider off after you leave, then millions of people in this city are gonna die. And you're just leaving me here to figure this out on my own. You good with that? Yeah. He turns the corner. Izuku sits down in the alley, head in his knees. What are you doing? Making you feel guilty. Is it working? Oh ho ho. You little don't even GAHHH. He starts muffling his yelling into his coat. No. Do not let him win. He turns back around. All right, kid, you win. Now come on, we've got no time to lose. Izuku happily gets up and runs after him. Oh yeah, so good. Homeless Izuku's voice is muffled by the katsudon he's currently shoving into his mouth at a rate which can't be human. It's honestly impressive. Izuku sits and waits politely for him to finish. He doesn't want to assume anything, because he knows what it's like to have not eaten for days. And there's no telling how much accidental multiverse travel takes out of a person. Maybe people eat more in his universe. That's the only feasible explanation for where all of this pork is going. These guys, best in the city, I swear. They shut down a few years ago in my universe. Gulp never knew why. A suspiciously large spider scurries across the table and hides behind the salt shaker. Sue, about showing me the ropes. Izuku prods. Oh yeah. Okay, so first things first, you're gonna want to use baby powder in the costume, heavy on the joints. Don't do brand deals though. Try not to break your limbs. Don't go over the limit of what you can handle unless you really need to. He pauses to eat some more. Also, open your own agency. Be your own boss, you know. That's all I got. He proceeds to return his attention to his food. Izuku stares at him, open-mouthed and astounded. Homeless Izuku doesn't notice. Really, that's it. The man loudly slurps his drink. Yup. At that moment, the waiter comes by and deposits a bill on the table. Homeless Izuku seems to become fully aware of the world around them and he freezes, then slowly looks up with his chopsticks still in his mouth. You have money, right? I'm not exactly liquid right now. I think you're gonna be a terrible teacher. Yeah. Now how far away from Jaku Hospital are we? Izuku pulls out his phone and makes a few taps. Premier medical facility in the Jaku countryside, founded by philanthropist Dr. Otto blah blah blah. Says about 3 hours by car, little under 2 by train. He gasps and his face lights up. You can teach me how you do that whip thing on the way there. Homeless Izuku just laughs and slides him the bill. I'm not swinging all the way to Jaku. Now stop pouting. Izuku did not stop pouting, at least until homeless Izuku, whose hero name he discovered to be Deku, of all things, let him ask all the questions he wanted. Deku had been a hero for 22 years and graduated from UA. The quirk they both shared was called One for All, and it was passed down from generation to generation, destined to put a stop to All for One. In his universe, All Might wasn't dead, just very old. Deku had met All Might after being attacked by a villain made of sludge. He grabbed onto his hero's pant leg when he jumped to ask if he could be a hero, accidentally setting the sludge free in the process. All Might showed him an injury he'd gotten from All for One and told him that it was too dangerous to become a hero without a quirk. Wait, you were quirkless too. Keep your voice down. Deku whispered, and yes, I was. So was my All Might before he got One for All. Not sure about yours. That was certainly something to ponder. Izuku had been attacked and grabbed onto All Might, but he didn't accidentally release the villain. If he had, would his life have turned out like Deku's? Would he have gone to UA, too? He let Deku continue his story. The sludge attacked his 𝐀𝐦, and he'd rushed out past some heroes that were too afraid to act to save him. All Might had been watching in the crowd, having gone past his time limit, and was inspired by Deku to act. All Might then found him on his way home and offered him One for All. After that, he trained for 10 months and made it in, getting attacked by villains a few times throughout his 3 years that were connected to All for One. After graduating, a big war kicked off between the heroes and an army led by the League of Villains. Original name, I know. The war decimated the country, but Deku and the heroes were victorious in the end and everything was rebuilt. He got married to one of his classmates, but his habits from the war never really left him, and he wasn't a very good husband. He had a tendency not to take care of himself and eventually it drove her away. The breaking point had been after Deku's mom had died. Izuku suddenly interrupted him with a hug, and Deku did his best not to cry. Learning about Deku's world and getting a few basic tips on using One for All made the train ride fly by. And before he knew it, he was following Deku to a ridge overlooking the hospital. The two began to suit up. Deku into his hero costume that was a clear homage to All Might's Silver Age costume, and Izuku into a cheap party store version of the same costume, complete with a mask with floppy bunny ears that were probably supposed to be All Might's iconic hair. Deku had made them stop to get something to conceal Izuku's identity, since he would have to deal with the long-term consequences if anyone recognized him, and Izuku had insisted on this. He felt a bit stupid now, though. The costume was somehow too loose and too tight at the same time. It bunched awkwardly at the joints, but all of the limbs were far too short, leaving the skin of his forearms and shins exposed to the frigid air. A small blue cape flapped behind him for a moment, but Deku ripped it off unceremoniously. Hey, it's a no on the cape. I think it's cool. It's disrespectful. All Might doesn't wear a cape. Izuku just rubs his neck and grumbles. It wasn't really something to argue over, though, and it only came down to his waist anyways. It would have looked dumb. Deku found a good vantage point behind a rock to look over the hospital. It looked more like a laboratory or an office building than your typical hospital. So, how do we retrace All Might's steps? Deku crouches down and puts his hand to his chin. That's a good question. Now, what would I do if I were me? He stays silent for a moment, and Izuku quietly copies his thinking pose. Got it. Step 1, I infiltrate the lab. 2, find the secret underground lab. How do you know there's a secret underground lab? In my universe, the owner of the hospital works for All for One. Plus, there's always a secret underground lab. Step 3, I find the password and hack the computer. It's not technically hacking if you have the password. Not now, I just lost my train of thought. Step 4, download the important stuff. I'll know it when I see it. Step 5, I grab a bagel from the cafeteria and run. Deku had drawn out a crude version of his plan in the snow. A couple of lopsided boxes were the only diagram he made for the entrance to the supposed underground lab. There were a couple of stick figures representing himself and 𝐴𝐿 scientist. But the only other thing he'd drawn was a bagel. So what am I doing? Ooh, step 7, you stay here. Your lookout. Very important. Look, man, you've got to teach me to do hero stuff, or else I'm not going to be able to help. Deku just braces himself against a tree, cracks his back with a mighty groan, and flicks a tendril of what he called Black Whip out into the air. Watch and learn, kid. I'll quiz you later, he shouts as he swings off towards the building. Izuku growls in frustration and slumps back against the rock. Why did I get stuck with the janky, old, broke, hobo version of me? He slams his fist into the rock, evidently with a bit too much force, as the entire thing splinters and falls apart at the middle. Oop! The sound of a car approaching evaporates his slight embarrassment, and he peers over what's left of the rock to a haunting sight. A familiar man in a tall, black mask exits the vehicle parked in front of the hospital entrance. Another man covered in hands gets out of the driver's seat. Izuku flings himself back down into a crouch, breathing heavily. All for one. Deku doesn't know he's here. He has to warn him. Uncharacteristic courage fills him and he gains control of his breathing and hardens his expression. It's time to make his move. What am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? Izuku silently shouts at himself as he scrambles along the ridge to get around to the side of the building. He nearly slips on a patch of ice. A quick flurry of lightning erupts as he just barely maintains enough control to jump up to the roof without being too loud. The hatch to the air duct squeaks open and Izuku climbs inside, immediately losing his grip and falling down about 10 feet. He lands right next to a vent grate and the man with the hands looks up towards the ceiling. Izuku scrambles back, and the man thankfully seems not to see him and continues on, following all for one deeper into the facility. Deku, Deku, Izuku calls out, whispering as loud as he can as he follows all for one's path from above. Yow, he yelps. He bumped into something soft, which turns out to be Deku. What are you doing here? He whispers angrily. All for one's here. He tries to squeeze his way next to Deku. Just move over. Ga, you're stepping on my foot. Go back outside. No, I can't sit there and watch somebody die without doing anything about it. I'm not doing that again. Deku stares at him, seemingly caught off guard. What? Most people I meet in the workplace try to kill me, so you're a nice change of pace. From below them, a new voice catches their attention. Master, look at this data. I know you can't really understand it, but these are really good numbers. A short, bald old man with a big, bushy mustache is addressing all for one. The man sits down at a keyboard and logs in. And, got the password. Deku whispers triumphantly. Master, if we fire again this week, there could be a black hole underneath the city. He flips the monitor around to show images of street lamps and buildings that are incredibly distorted, like looking at them through a kaleidoscope. One stoplight is jumbled up, with what looks like several different versions of the same object trying to shove each other out of the same spot. You see this, and this. This is multiple dimensions crashing into each other. Deku looks unimpressed, and is mocking the man as he speaks by making a mouth with his hand. This is pretty standard superhero stakes. You get used to it. Watch this. Next he's gonna say you've got 24 hours. He deepens his voice to mimic all for one. You've got 24 hours, all for one tells the man. Deku winks. All for one turns to leave, but the man gets up and follows him out the door, still trying to plead with him. What this means is, there could be a rupture in the space-time continuum. Deku winces. Ooh, that's bad. Actually, everything he said was bad. I was lying before. With that, he opens the vent into the room and with a quick peek, confirms that no one else is there and nimbly hops down, starting to log into the computer. Izuku tries to climb out as well, but as he grips the edge of the grate, he uses too much force again and the metal creaks and groans, morphing to the shape of his hand and locking his fingers in. What are you doing, bud? I can't move. Izuku whisper shouts. Okay, relax your fingers. We don't have time. Just let go. Be in the moment. I am in the moment. It's a terrible moment. Izuku jerks around, causing the hanging lights under him to swing back and forth as he tries to wrench his hand free. They're right there. They're going to hear you. Kid, you gotta let go. What do you do to relax? Izuku goes still and takes in a deep breath, closing his eyes. He thinks about what makes him the most calm. He starts muttering about All Might, factoids, statistics, recounts of rescues, whatever he can think of. Oh, for crying out loud. Izuku's hand releases its death grip on the vent and he falls to the floor with a loud crash, knocking over a table full of tools in the process. Teenagers. Just the worst. Deku looks over the desk for Izuku, but he's nowhere to be found. He hops over and spins around, eyes narrowed. Izuku, where did you go? I'm right here, he whispers back, confused. Where? I can't see you. I'm right in front of you. Deku's eyes widen and Izuku looks down at himself, noticing that he is unable to. One for all lets me turn invisible. Not in my universe. Deku tries to find the kid, and he jabs his finger into the air in front of him. You just poked me in my eye. Deku ignores him, waving his hand as the effect dissipates. Izuku's body returns to its original opacity. This is incredible. Some kind of fight or flight thing. What's that? All of a sudden, the footsteps of the man from before approach. Izuku disappears again with a slight pop. Deku turns to Izuku. Remember this password. Capital 𝐷𝐺𝐹𝐴MPESAND. Slow down. 4-3$5876534545535 and download the schematic. Write it down. How do I do that? While I turn on the charm. He brushes a strand of hair behind his ear. The door slides open, and the man looks at Deku in surprise. All Might. Oh, hey. Didn't see you there. Wow. The doctor chuckles in disbelief. Okay, I'm kind of freaking out right now. I mean, you're supposed to be dead. Surprise. Izuku stands at the computer, typing in the password. The man moves forward and begins to inspect Deku. This is fascinating. An entirely different All Might. He grabs Deku's face and turns his head. Hey, that's my face. Little bit of a gut, perhaps from dimensional warping. Deku looks thoroughly insulted. Oh yeah, I was way flatter before I warped. Izuku gets most of the password in, but can't remember the last 2 numbers. He picks up the monitor and turns it around, wiggling it to catch Deku's attention. Deku tries to use his fingers, but the doctor is persistent, so he tries to turn the man so that he can't see his computer monitor inexplicably floating with his password mostly typed in. Hey, how old are you? Because you don't look a day over 35. He emphasizes the last bit, and Izuku types in 3-5 and he's in. Only to be greeted by an absolute mess. Files are strewn all across the desktop, most not labeled in any kind of coherent or useful manner. Organize your desktop, dude, he whispers to himself. Back with Deku, the doctor pushes him backwards into a chair that instantly snaps restraints closed around his wrists and ankles. Sorry, this might pinch. The man rummages through a drawer and comes back with a Q-tip that gets shoved into Deku's mouth. Sorry, I just really need to get these samples. Deku flashes a look at Izuku to hurry up as the man turns on a microscope. Wow, just complete cellular decay. As Deku looks over again, he sees Izuku carrying the entire computer setup towards the door. What are you doing? He whispers. I'm just taking the whole thing. The doctor turns back to Deku. And obviously you've been glitching. Glitching? No. As he says that, he's overcome with a minor spasm and lightning flashes in the air again. Why would you even say that? If you stay in this dimension too long, your body is going to disintegrate. Do you know how painful that will be? All Might. Deku shakes his head. No, I don't know. The doctor leans forward. You can't imagine. And I, for one, can't wait to watch. At that, Izuku freezes in the doorway and slowly turns to stare at the man in horror. What did you say your name was, again? The man stands up and removes his lab coat, revealing 4 black, fleshy arms coming out of his spine. Dr. Otto Octavius. Deku now realizes just how bad this is. All for One's chief scientist in his dimension is a woman who resembles the old man in no way, but the name confirms who he is. One of the arms extends and grabs Deku by the throat, tipping the chair over and slamming his back into the floor. Can I assume that your friends call you Doc Ock? He chokes out. My friends actually call me Otto. My enemies call me Doc Ock. I got this. Run. Deku grunts as he snaps the restraints. Izuku runs out of the room. He can hear the doctor asking who he's talking to and taunting him as Deku is thrown around the room and repeatedly slammed into the wall. Deku does his best to reassure him, but being flung from room to room as he crashes through windows and walls isn't exactly reassuring. Okay, maybe it's a little bit bad, he hears Deku say as he's thrown through a hallway behind him. As he looks, he crashes into a blonde man in glasses and a lab coat. He momentarily loses control of his invisibility and makes eye contact with the guy. He has spiky blonde hair that is very familiar, but it doesn't really process as Izuku just picks up the computer and starts running again. As he dashes off, the blonde glares at him from behind with crimson eyes and takes off in a different direction. Deku comes crashing through another wall and stumbles before falling into stride next to him. Alright, let me tell you the good news. We don't need the monitor. He takes it from Izuku's hands and tosses it behind them, lightening the load slightly. Not a second later, a dark arm snatches him by the throat and tosses him down the hallway once more. All Might, you didn't tell me you had an invisible friend. The doctor sounds genuinely excited at that, which is terrifying. His invisibility begins to falter again as he turns around and tries to run away from the man again. Could you give me that back, young man? It's proprietary. Deku. Izuku feels a tendril grab him and jerk him backwards, sliding him along the floor underneath the doctor. The man scrambles after him with his super-powered arms as Izuku gets dragged along. He and Deku just barely make it through a thick door in time and one of the arms gets stuck, still trying to grasp them. They sprint down another hallway and burst into the cafeteria. Oh, Deku says, this'd be a good time to turn invisible. Izuku just nods and gulps. Yep, okay, not going to turn invisible. Selecting a bagel, they begin to casually stroll through the giant room. making their way to the doors to a balcony overlooking the forest. Act super normal. One of the doctors looks up in shock. All Might, you know, that's funny. I get that a lot. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 tries to be cool and shoots her a nod and in a deep voice says, hey. All Might, another person shouts, and all at once, the entire cafeteria is readying either quirks or weapons at the two. Hey, hands up. Deku takes the computer and presses the bagel into 𝐬𝐻𝐸's chest. Now we do a switchy. Hey, get back here. Stop them. He took a bagel. Deku and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 burst through the doors and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 throws the bagel behind him, beaming a poor doctor in the head. All right, time to swing just like I taught you. When did you teach me that? I didn't. It's a little joke for team building. They come up to the railing and Deku readies himself to leap off. Black Whip is all about controlling your emotions. Look where you want it to hit and envision reaching out. Imagine it as an extension of your own body. You ready? 𝐬𝐻𝐸 panics. Of course I'm not ready. He does what he's told though, and as they jump, he does manage to produce a tendril. It's long and flimsy, but it sticks to a tree and he goes swinging through the air. Unfortunately, he has no idea how to control himself and promptly slams into a tree trunk, falling down into the snow below. Although, doctors from the hospital appear and begin shooting at him. What kind of children's hospital staff's lunatics loyal to a supervillain? 𝐬𝐻𝐸 takes off into the forest, the people in lab coats close on his heels. What are you doing down there? Deku yells. I run better than I swing. You have to swing or they'll catch you. This is what you wanted. Deku thwips out another line and pulls ahead of him. A tree nearly falls on 𝐬𝐻𝐸 and he trips, landing on another fallen trunk. The sound of some kind of buzzsaw grows closer. Oh no. Doc Ock bursts through the trees, two of his extra hands spinning like saw blades. He cackles maniacally and locks in on 𝐬𝐻𝐸, moving forward rapidly. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 tries again to use the new power, but it just comes out in short spurts that fly off into the trees. Deku tries to call out helpful advice. Aim with your hips. Look where you want it to hit. Square your shoulders. Don't forget to follow through. Don't shoot off your back foot. That's too many things. Then stop listening to me. That's the best idea you've had all day. Green lightning wraps around 𝐬𝐻𝐸 as he scrambles up a tree with the mad doctor right behind him. He reaches the top of the tree and leaps off, barely avoiding the spinning limbs. All right, he can do this. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 focuses, pushing all of his emotions into his hands, and he reaches out. A long, slender tendril snags onto a trunk in front of him and he lets out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Nice, kid. He's still a bit wobbly in the air, but Deku swings up next to him and holds out the computer so that 𝐬𝐻𝐸 can hold onto it with him to steady himself. Release a bit after you start going up again and release. He times it with 𝐬𝐻𝐸. Thwip and release. Thwip. Release. You're a natural. Woohoo. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 cheers. It feels so good to fly through the air like this. Is this what Deku gets to feel like every single day? I gotta say, you're amazing, man. He flashes a golden smile at his new mentor underneath his mask. We're a little team. Me as the teacher who can still do it. You as the student who can do it just not as good. I'm proud of us. Is there anything you want to say to me? Before 𝐬𝐻𝐸 can even think of anything, Deku glitches midair, and both he and the computer fall towards the ground. Deku, he dives after them. Deku is lucky enough to catch himself on a tree branch. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 snags the branch as well and just barely manages to grab onto the power cord, but it's beginning to slip. The branch breaks under their combined weight and they begin to tumble through the air once again. Deku tries to catch the computer, but a grotesque black arm snatches it away first. Before they can swing after the doctor, black tendrils from the sky grab the both of them and deposit them into a tree. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 several explosions sound overhead, and the doctor's extra limbs explode. Before he can fall, the tendrils grab him and pull him skywards into a figure dressed in orange and black with large metal gauntlets that suspiciously resemble stun grenades. The figure slams down onto the doctor with a kick and takes the computer, then uses their own tendrils to swing up and stand on a branch in front of 𝐬𝐻𝐸 and Deku. Their outfit has a hood and a solid black mask that hides their entire head except for two bright orange outlines for what look like exaggerated eyes. The figure pulls off both hood and mask in one move and scowls at them. Familiar spiky blonde hair and crimson eyes are accompanied by a voice that can't possibly belong to this person. There's no way he'd be all the way out here. Katsuki Bakugo groans. Of course there's two of you stupid nerds. Listen up, extras, because I'm only doing this one last time. My name is Katsuki Bakugo and I'm the 10th holder of One for All. For the last 2 years, I've been the one and only Dynamite. You guys know the rest. I joined a band. Memories of the school festival flash by. Most of the band stayed together and practiced every once in a while after that, for a little while at least. Saved my teacher. Katsuki kicks Aizawa out of the way of Shigaraki approaching from behind. I couldn't save my best friend. The battle against 9 had been beyond brutal. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 had given One for All to Katsuki in the hopes that the two of them would be able to overpower the villain. He was right, but it was a much closer thing than it should have been. It didn't go anything like how you may know of. The smell of blood and ozone pierced the senses as the burning air swirled around 𝐀𝐦's vortex. The island around them was torn to shreds, unrecognizable from the peaceful land it had once been. There were no sounds other than the sharp crack of thunder as 𝐁𝐦 tossed lightning all around, and the two boys opposing him were wreathed in their own jade and amber electricity. It looked as if 3 thunderclouds were all locked in deadly combat. Many hard blows were endured by both sides. But eventually, 𝐁𝐦 was on the ropes. He was barely holding back the cellular decay. The final attack should have been something they did together, but Izuku rushed ahead. One final smash was all it took, but 𝐁𝐦 was unwilling to go down alone. The beam tore through Izuku's torso. It was more painful than anything he'd felt before. Even so, he pushed through. Each punch was like an artillery shell, and the villain crumpled under the assault. Izuku was left standing in a crater with his fist held high, and a hole straight through his stomach. He bled out in Katsuki's arms, and help arrived far too late. By the time his classmates made it there, Katsuki was slumped over next to a cold corpse. How was he supposed to tell Auntie and Co? Katsuki left UA after that and struck out on his own. So now I save everyone else. And I don't do friends anymore, just to avoid any distractions. And one day this weird thing happened. And I mean like, really weird. I was blown into last week, literally. I was in Japan, but it wasn't my Japan. I started tracking down the one person I could be reasonably sure did this, and that's when I ran into you too. Nice to see you again. Izuku stammers. Is this 𝐀𝐦 like his? What's their relationship like where he comes from? 𝐀𝐦 looks at him with something entirely indecipherable on his face. He thinks it might be grief. Whatever it is, it at least isn't hatred. Yeah, let's go. Without another word, he pulls on his mask and swings off into the forest. Deku shoots him a look to tell him that he also has no idea what's up with this 𝐀𝐦, and they swing off after him. So you just decided to take the whole thing? Huh. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 devolves into a fit of snorts as he tries not to laugh too loudly. Taking a train between Jaku and Musutafu had been a much better idea than the bus. Most of the ride so far had been spent explaining the details of how Izuku accidentally met All Might, got one for all, met Deku, and what they were doing at the Jaku medical facility. 𝐴𝐾𝐲 laughed and smiled a lot, maybe too much. It was surreal to see Izuku's ex-best friend not acting like an ex anymore. He was still as crass as ever, but having known how to read through his own 𝐀𝐦's mood for ages, Izuku could detect genuine respect and happiness upon looking at him. It was something he hadn't seen since before 𝐀𝐦's quirk came in. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 quickly suggested bringing the computer to UA. He explained that the principal was extremely odd and would have planned out contingencies for multiversal travel. Suddenly, Izuku didn't feel quite as bad about not getting in. Deku cringed at the notion and tried to plead otherwise. But 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 quickly shut him down by asking where he was going to make an override key, and if he could even do it himself. The old man immediately pouted and sulked off to take a nap before they arrived. Deku seemed more comfortable around 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 than Izuku. If he had to guess, it was also weird seeing the boy being so much nicer than he had been, but mainly due to his age. According to Deku, his 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 had long since mellowed out and they had become good friends again, but it wasn't until long after high school. It was odd for him to see such a young version of the explosive blonde being so mature. Izuku could hazard a guess as to why, though. He hadn't said the name of the best friend that he lost, but he'd introduced himself as the 10th holder of One for All. That meant there had to be a 9th, and it didn't take a genius to guess who that 9th could have been. I'm sorry about your friend. The silence had dragged on for so long, a whole 8 seconds, that Izuku felt compelled to break it. There it was again, though, that indecipherable look that 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 gave him in the forest. Thanks, Izuku. It means a lot. The words were genuine appreciation, but 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻's face looked like it didn't quite believe that. It was twisted into something halfway between a scowl and that face 𝐀𝐦 used to make when he was about to cry. If you ever decide to do friends again, I could always open up a slot. God, that was dumb. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 just kind of snorts and looks away. I'll keep you posted. Arriving at the gates of UA was just as nerve-wracking as it had been when Izuku had bombed the entrance exam. The giant H-shaped building loomed in front of them, the moonlight reflecting off the countless windows. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 pulled out his ID and scans it, and the gate buzzed and slid open after a short delay. Deku, who'd been getting steadily more anxious since getting off the train, tried to start walking in the other direction. Maybe we shouldn't be here. The gate literally opened for us, you old geezer. Bad idea, bad idea, bad eye Quirk. One of 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻's tendrils snaked out and grabbed Deku's collar. He rolled his eyes and started dragging him through towards the front entrance. About halfway up the walkway, a long, thin piece of gray fabric shoots out from seemingly nowhere. It's headed straight for 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻's head, but he just tilts his head to the side and lets it pass with less than an inch to spare. Izuku flinches and gets into a defensive position. But 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐻 just casually calls out into the darkness. Knock it off, hobo. We've got stuff to do. A second later, a man with long, dark hair steps out from the trees on the side of the walkway, and Izuku can see that the gray fabric from earlier was some kind of strange scarf, now resting around the man's neck. 𝗏𝗂𝐬, the man growls. Mind explaining to me why your ID just opened the gate and you somehow have 2 visitors not 2 minutes after I did a room check and you were seemingly dead asleep? 𝗏𝗂𝐬 sneers. Maybe because I'm not your 𝗏𝗂𝐬. Naturally. This helps the situation a lot, and the man drops into a stance like he's about to attack the person who just confirmed himself to be some kind of imposter of a UA student. His hair and the scarf both begin to float, and his eyes light up a terrifying shade of crimson. You have exactly 3 seconds to either exit the premises or that won't be necessary, Mr. Aizawa. Everyone's head snapped to the voice that just came from the door to the building to see a small, white rat walking out on its hind legs. It also happened to be wearing a suit. Izuku looked back and forth, but no one else seemed to find this at all confusing, so he just let it go. I had hoped to keep all of this under wraps as to not have any such chaos ensue, but it seems I was not quite careful enough. Would you all be so kind as to follow me to the support lab? I believe we should be able to extract what data we need from that computer you're carrying there. The man sighs and straightens back up as the scarf and his hair fall back around his shoulders. As he turns, Izuku catches a glimpse of a pair of yellow goggles that he just happens to recognize. I know you. You're a Eraserhead. Well, yeah, dingus. I was wondering how long it was going to take you to start nerding out. 𝗏𝗂𝐬 gives him a light smack on the back of the head as he follows the man inside the building. Izuku scowls at him dramatically. Eraserhead somehow manages to sigh over their bickering. I have no idea what's going on, but let's just please get to the support lab so it can be over with. 𝗏𝗂𝐬 and Izuku look away sheepishly and jog to catch up. Deku lags behind them, doing his best to strut confidently through the dark and empty halls. Support lab, huh? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Just this neat little room where they blow stuff up and occasionally make us support gear. Eraserhead leads them to a door and smirks before scanning his ID. The door lights up with the letters UA written out across it in bright LEDs and slides open to reveal a small elevator. 𝗏𝗂𝐬 and Izuku step in immediately, but Deku drags his feet, grumbling to himself. I mean, this place is just pretentious. As the floor descends beneath them, a massive underground area with several pedestals and workstations appear in the darkness. The support students here get to work on some really cool stuff. Izuku can spot some kind of gauntlets, a hovercraft, and even some kind of futuristic-looking car. He turns back to Deku. Is yours anything like this? Oh yeah, exactly like this. Just take away the plane, car, hover bike. Imagine it way smaller. Imagine a futon in the back. He trails off and scoffs. I feel bad for these guys. Izuku can hear the jealousy in his voice, though. However, he's quickly distracted by several display cases filled with costumes for different students of the heroics department. He stops in front of one with a golden 1 million inscribed on the chest and notices a particular detail about it. Hey, Deku. The older hero turns around to see the large, red piece of fabric in his hands. I think this is a cape. Deku just laughs. The Ratman thing had been already down there waiting for them, sipping tea from a very nice-looking cup at the desk to a giant computer. 𝗏𝗂𝐬 approaches him and sets the stolen desktop on the desk. All for one knows we're coming. We'll be outnumbered. It just looks up at him and grins the best a rat can grin. Oh, I wouldn't be so sure of that, young 𝗏𝗂𝐬. You might need these. He holds out 3 name tag stickers. I hope you didn't think you 3 would be smart enough to have come here first. All 3 of them look confused for a moment, but they each begin to feel that harmonic sensation from Danger Sense. Looking up towards the ceiling, 3 new sets of eyes pop out of the darkness, 1 green, 1 white, and 1 red. Standing on one of the non-illuminated workstations are 3 figures. The first is dressed in what looks like tactical ninja garb. He has pouches all over his pants and a bandolier running from his right shoulder to his waist. He also has a ninja-esque headwrap, complete with white, raindrop-shaped eyes similar to those on 𝗏𝗂𝐬's mask. But he's wearing a cloak with a long, black trench coat as well. It billows out behind him like a short cape. He doesn't speak, but only offers a simple nod to the 3 down below. Is he some kind of ninja assassin? Where is that wind coming from? We're in a basement. He bows his head and raises his hand to look at it in some sort of bizarre, dramatic pose. Wherever I go, the wind follows. And the wind. He pauses and clenches the hand into a fist for extra flair. Smells like rain. The one with the glowing red eyes steps out next, and they seem to be floating in front of his face like some sort of hologram. As he lowers his hood, they dissipate. Izuku sucks in a breath, because he looks almost exactly like him, just more animated. He's decked out in a super futuristic dark blue jumpsuit with glowing red lines on it. His boots and gloves are made of shining, silver metal, and the seams of them also glow with the same red lines. He cracks a huge grin and rips off the mask of the ninja, causing him to stumble. The ninja, thankfully, doesn't look exactly like Izuku, but it's close. His hair is longer and completely black, and he glares at future him with vermilion eyes. Don't mind the emo one. He's all bark. Buys his mom flowers every day. Ha. Some of us don't get the luxury of acting foolish, a new voice says. New is a relative term, because it still sounds just like Izuku, but they all talk differently. Deku obviously sounds older, and 𝗏𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐻 sounds like 𝗏𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐻. The two that have already introduced themselves start bickering. Future Izuku sounds snappy and jovial. He starts trying to goad the emo Izuku into a fight by taunting him. Speaking of the emo Izuku, he puts some effort into sounding more gruff and bitter than he probably is. The one who just interrupted, however, sounds flat out tired. His intonation was flat and his tone was dry. Clearly, this new Izuku was worthy of being as bitter as he sounded. As he steps into the light, Izuku can see why. His dark green costume is dirty and tattered. The mouth guard around his neck is dented and scratched. And what look like two bunny ears coming out from the top of his mask are incredibly frayed and torn. His jumpsuit is missing most of its sleeves, replaced by thick, tight red bracers running all the way up his arms. The other end disappears into gloves that were probably once upon a time white, but had since become something much closer to brown. Knee-high black boots covered his legs, and the metal shoes at the end were so worn and dented that they almost looked like grotesque metal toes. He honestly looked pretty creepy. He doesn't remove his mask, but he probably doesn't need to. Izuku can barely hear Deku gasp this time, but he doesn't really process it. His mind is reeling at there being more versions of him. Were there really that many timelines where he was chosen by All Might to receive one for all? It was honestly staggering to try to wrap his head around, so he just compartmentalized it to unpack later. All three of them hop down to the lowest level, and all of them get that familiar ringing sensation, confirming that they all are what they say. Forgetting their previous bickering, the future and emo Izuku immediately start asking questions, mainly to Deku. 𝗏𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐻 hangs back, having been prepared for it to start and not wanting to get flooded with questions about every facet of his life. The boy in green hardly even blinks, and just strides towards Eraserhead and the rat thing. Nezu, so that was its name, then. It was familiar, but Izuku had actively ignored anything to do with UA after that day on the roof. How close are we to tracking down All for One? The barest hint of anger came into his voice as he said the villain's name. It was the first hint of any emotion he'd showed thus far. What had happened to him that he was so focused on nothing but the mission at hand? Not as close as you'd like, Eraserhead answered. The files have all been encrypted and it will take a couple of days at best to decrypt what we need to both find the location of the collider and enough schematics to develop an override. We'll set you up in private dorms far from any activity on campus so that no chaos breaks out. God knows what would happen if any of the students saw you six. The boy in green let out a disappointed huff, but did not turn his eyes away from the monitor Nezu was working. From his limited knowledge, Izuku could see that they were copying over any unencrypted files and beginning to work on skimming the saved data for any passwords. Hacking like this was an incredibly slow process, but he was somewhat grateful for it. He wanted time to learn things about the other versions of him, and to see if they could help him learn to control one for all. Hey, new kid. A shout from the future Izuku drew his attention back to the group, and so began their nerd session, as 𝗏𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐻 so affectionately referred to it as. Future Izuku used his black whip to snag a notebook from one of the workstations, tore out the used pages, and they all set to work. After 3 hours, a half-full notebook, and only a couple of broken support student projects, Eraserhead finally kicked everyone out and sent them to a spare dorm building on the far side of campus. The boy in green did not participate in the discussion, even though 𝗏𝑃𝑃𝑔𝐻 eventually relented and joined in, and he was silent for the whole walk to the temporary rooms. He'd been the hardest to convince to leave, even though he had been visibly swaying on his feet from exhaustion. Deku kept shooting the boy troubled glances. If he noticed, there was certainly no indication. In the end, he'd only left once Nezu promised to update him immediately to any information they uncover. Izuku was far too excited to sleep, because the other hymns had promised to start training him in the morning. He decided to flip back through the notebook entries detailing his alternates' quirks and what little they were able to glean about his own while in the support lab. One for all quirk notes all users seem to possess somewhere close to the same top strength, though each is physically capable of using higher or lower amounts currently. Quirks from the previous users seem to have more variants, though they each seem to fit a certain archetype. Differences also extend to which user had which quirk, i.e. danger sense may have come from any number user. They do not seem to be bound to a particular order. One common thread is that all users present have unlocked their own forms of danger sense and black whip. Perhaps universal that these two are manifested first or could just be common between dimensions. Too small of a data sample to rule out coincidence. Each user that is named Izuku Midoriya has been assigned a nickname for an easier time communicating. Izuku Midoriya home to this dimension. Deku, oldest version, Deku is his pro-hero name. D divided by Q insisted upon by Izuku Midoriya of the futuristic dimension, pronounced with an upwards inflection on the first syllable. 𝐷𝗵𝗄, 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐬 𝐷𝗵𝗄 of a dimension where history is currently unknown. Refused participation, but will respond to 𝐷𝗵𝗄. Users' quirks and backstories. 𝐬𝐡𝐚𝐬. Order of users is unknown. Capacitance allows the storing and release of electricity buildup by making use of 1-for-all's basic strength via a technique dubbed full cowling by most variants. Full cowling is the continual use of a controlled percentage of 1-for-all's strength all throughout the body. Lightning color varies from user to user. Limits and specifics unknown at this time. Possible to control output to specific voltages, ampules. Appears to be unique in that none of the users present possess any similar quirk. All have lightning, but none can use it to any effect other than cosmetic. Danger sense seems to be the same or similar to the point of indifference across present users. Warns the user of nearby danger or ill intent. If danger is great enough, becomes a sharp pain in the user's skull. Black webs. All present users possess a variant of black web, but mine seems to be unique. The tendrils I create act more like inanimate ropes or strands of web than controllable tendrils. I can manipulate the shape to a much smaller extent than the others, but mine stick around after being detached. How long they stick around is unknown, but I can make them evaporate by concentrating a bit. The strands are thinner than the other users and can adhere to each other to form more complex structures. So they were likened to spider webs. Camouflage. Not much data to go off of, but other users seem to have a quirk that produces smoke that they have a limited amount of control over. This quirk appears to fall under that archetype, but allows me to turn almost fully invisible. I can still be seen on thermal cameras, and when I move, my outline becomes easier to discern. It seems like the quirk has a harder time hiding movements, and the air and any other objects nearby help give me away. While standing still, it proved to be extremely difficult to see me, especially in the dark. I don't cast a shadow well camouflaged. Deku, 38 years old, has been a pro hero for 20 years. Universe's history seems to share the most similarities with this one. Danger sense 4th user Blackweb 5th user Fajin 7th user. Repeated movements allows for the storing of kinetic energy to be released at once in an extra powerful movement. Most similar in archetype to capacitance, but for kinetic energy rather than electricity. No apparent control over output other than how long a movement is repeated. Divided by 𝐸𝐻, 16 years old, is a vigilante. Universe appears to be around 850 years in the future compared to this one. Not much is known about history relevant to this time period, though events could be somewhat repeating themselves as his time is dealing with very similar issues and villains to this universe. Was actually born with a weak quirk rather than being quirkless. Because of how far in the future it is, no one is born quirkless anymore. Birth quirk acts like a reverse version of 𝐀𝐦 𝐍𝐸, where the user can telekinetically pull themselves towards objects or surfaces. The effect is nearly identical to a self-gravitation quirk. Darkweb 4th user insisted upon calling it Darkweb because it sounded cooler. Danger sense 6th user Blur 7th user allows user to change the speed of objects in motion or themselves. Creates a red glowing, blurring visual effect due to the speed, hence the name. Akatani Makumo, 17 years old, UA student. History of his universe seems mostly consistent with that of this one, but personal history deviates largely. Has not elaborated on those differences thus far. Smokescreen 4th user allows user to excrete any amount of dark gray smoke they desire, up to a certain point. Very limited control at higher volumes, but can be mostly kept in an area around the user at low volumes. Subconscious telekinetic control. Blackweb 5th user Float 6th user allows user to adjust the effect of gravity on themselves. Only works in one direction. User cannot increase effect of gravity past the point of Earth's normal gravitational pull, which seems to be consistent between all present users. Danger sense 7th user Katsuki Bakugo, 17 years old, vigilante. Universe history seems extremely consistent with Deku's, up until a bit more than halfway through the first year, when he received 1-for-all from his universe's 𝐬𝐻𝐚𝐬 𝐍𝐸. Danger sense 4th user Blackweb 5th user Explosion, Birth quirk, power of explosions and potency of sweat enhanced by receiving 1-for-all. The subtle differences between universes were fascinating. If he had the time, he'd try to explore why there are so many common traits of the users pulled to his dimension, namely why 4 of the 5 of them were alternate versions of himself. Why did some details like which user held which quirk not have an effect on what order they were unlocked in for Blackweb and Danger sense, but the others seemed to unlock themselves at random? There are so many interesting questions to ponder, but after his 5th time going over what he'd written down, Izuku was fast asleep. Izuku awoke early the next morning, having been too excited to sleep very much. Deku chastised him for it when he confessed to just how little sleep he'd gotten. It would be harder to get the hang of 1-for-all if he was exhausted, but Izuku waved him off. As the other users woke up one by one, Izuku found himself getting more and more anxious that he was practically shaking. 𝗬𝗵𝗵 somehow managed to sneak out and get coffee, which all of them slurped down like they hadn't drunk anything for days. Midoriya was the last to be seen, but it was unclear if he'd even slept at all. He was still in the same ratty uniform, and his posture was as tired as ever. Naturally, he declined to participate and stalked off to find Nezu. Izuku caught Deku looking at him several times. His expression reminded him of the way Bakugo had looked at him when they met in the forest. He didn't get very long to dwell on it, because they eventually caved to his pestering and headed off towards Gym Alpha, which Nezu had been kind enough to cordon off for them. Much of the morning from then on was spent doing small experiments and testing limits. Summoning the strength of one for all came naturally to Izuku, but he was so far unable to produce any of the powers he'd manifested previously, except for Danger Sense. The others had said it was fine, as it was probably best to start with controlling his strength first, but he could see the worry and disappointment in their eyes. His baseline strength was unnaturally high, according to Deku. Most of them that were able to use more than a few % right away were already very fit. None of them had one for all stimulate their muscle growth the way it had for him. He had also taken to controlling it faster than most of them. The way it felt like warmth flooding through him was somewhat unique in that the others had only been able to feel the core of the power after several months of having it. Thankfully, after the fiasco with his closet door, Izuku was pretty good about keeping his strength under control. It wasn't too different from the way he might hold a delicate object very carefully, even with normal strength. That didn't make moving around any less awkward, unfortunately. It was a lot harder to run when each step covered several meters than it appeared. For now, his main method of getting around quickly was to jump around, bouncing off the walls and ceiling. Deku laughed and said he looked like a bunny, but 𝐻𝐻𝐻 said the way he crouched upon landing and taking off looked more like some kind of bug. After far too long arguing about it, they settled on a jumping spider. Their one test at the fullest power he could had hurt like a bitch, but he didn't seem to sustain any real injury from it. 𝗬𝗵𝗵 theorized that whatever was different about One for All in this universe was, it seemed to be doing its best to protect its user. The giant hole in the gym wall signified that he was able to wield at least very close to All Might's top strength. Bakugo seemed thoroughly impressed at that estimate. His Izuku had tried using that amount from the get-go and it shattered his limbs. After mulling over that comforting possibility, they called a break for lunch. 𝗬𝗵𝗵 snuck off to steal food from the cafeteria, and he ended up having to make a second trip because of just how much Izuku was scarfing down. It didn't hit him until he started eating, but he could swear he'd never been this hungry in his life. Suddenly gaining 30 pounds of muscle does that to someone, apparently. Seeing that his control over his strength was passable enough for now, the afternoon was focused on using his new quirks. It really didn't go all that poorly. After being spooked into turning invisible a couple of times by 𝐻𝐻𝐻, they figured out that camouflage was basically just the flight portion of his natural fight or flight response. 20 minutes later, all Izuku had managed was to make himself look sort of hazy, but it was a start. Training Blackwebs was up next. 𝗬𝗵𝗵 was by far the best of them at using his Dark Whip, so he was elected instructor. For someone normally so jovial and carefree, he became deadly serious. This quirk is probably your most versatile tool. It works off of emotions, but anger is by far the most potent source of power. He was pacing back and forth kind of like a drill sergeant. Izuku opened his mouth to say something, but 𝗬𝗵𝗵 whirled around and got in his face. You will listen to me and listen well. Use your anger. Don't let it use you. Don't let this power be the thing that drives everyone you love and care about away from you. Not like I did. For the first time, genuine darkness overtook his tone. All Izuku could do was nod slowly. Seeing that he was sufficiently frightened, 𝗬𝗵𝗵's trademark grin returned and he stepped back. Great. Now imagine yourself reaching out towards that wall over there. Whether it was 𝗬𝗵𝗵's surprisingly effective tutelage or simply the buildup of excess stress and emotions from the past 24 hours, Izuku made considerable progress with his webs. Producing more than one strand from each arm at a time was hard, but the way they naturally stuck around after being detached from his body was extremely helpful. It did come at the cost of the way the rest of them were able to manipulate the shape of their whips, but creating complex structures to catch falling debris or restraining villains without having to keep focus directly on them were only scratching the surface of what he was capable of. They had already determined that the strands tended to last about an hour, unless he tried to make them go away. He could also make them last longer by envisioning how long he wanted them to last when creating them. The final quirk to train was capacitance, only this one wouldn't cooperate. Deku's 𝗲 was the closest power to it, with it being stored kinetic energy rather than electricity, but no matter what they tried, they couldn't make any progress. Deku was extremely disheartened. He was already bothered by something about Midoriya, and not getting Izuku to produce even a spark in 2 hours really hit him hard. He still produced lightning when using One for All, but it only behaved the same as everyone else's. He was unable to produce a single volt throughout the entire afternoon. He was panting and drenched in sweat at sunset, and 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐲 had to gently, then more forcefully suggest that they stop for the day and eat dinner. Deku frowned and left, stating that he'd eat dinner somewhere else. Dinner was calm, but fun. The other users shared things about themselves and their worlds. Midoriya even ate with them. 𝗬𝗫𝐿 stories of villains he'd fought were so outlandish that no one was sure if he was telling the truth or not. Eraserhead had been checking in periodically throughout the day, and once he left to go supervise ONA for the night, the others all huddled together and explained their latest scheme. They were going to take Izuku out on a short patrol. Surprisingly, it had been Midoriya that suggested to get him field experience. Deku found out what they were planning, and agreed not to rat them out if he could be allowed along to chaperone them. As everyone scampered off to grab gear from their rooms, Izuku could see him talking to Midoriya. Both of them had tears in their eyes, and after a minute of hushed discussion, Midoriya flung himself forward without warning and wrapped Deku in a tight hug. Izuku let them be. Moving quickly and quietly was familiar to Izuku, though he had never done it hopping between rooftops. He'd certainly hit on some before to avoid bullies in middle school, but the wind rushing by as he swung himself around the quieter parts of downtown was just downright intoxicating. The wind rushing past, the floating feeling in his stomach as he reached the top of an arc. He never wanted to touch the ground again. A shrill scream cut through the cold night air, and all 6 users' heads snapped towards the sound. 𝐴𝑘𝐦 landed on a rooftop and used a couple of explosions to change his trajectory and give him some extra momentum. 𝐷𝗵𝗫𝐻 executed a fancy maneuver midair and slingshotted himself after the blonde. Akatani and Midoriya stopped themselves with float and used air pressure to propel themselves towards the sound. "Come on, kid. You're about to earn your stripes," Deku shouted as he planted his feet on the side of a building and kicked off using Fajin, leaving large cracks in the brick. Izuku shot out a line to his left and turned the next corner at breakneck speed, using the centrifugal force to accelerate his body towards the sounds of danger. The scene was far worse than Izuku could have imagined. Fires raged all along the street for an entire city block. Civilians were screaming and running in every direction. The entire thing seems to be centered around a pile-up of flaming cars. Everything is so chaotic and so loud that all Izuku can do is stand there, mouth open, frozen in shock. At the center of it all stands several people wearing strange masks that look like bird beaks. One in a coat with purple fluff, presumably their leader, starts shouting, "All Might is dead. The age of all for one is upon you poor sick fools. And the Shy Hisekai intend to cure you all." Midoriya lands, and hardly missing a beat, growls Chisaki. He charges towards the man, green lightning flowing around him. Deku and Akatani dash towards a large man with flowing orange hair. Their blows shake the very street, shattering windows all around them as each strike is thrown by a fist breaking the sound barrier. 𝐷𝗵𝗫𝐻 and 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐲 immediately launch themselves towards the rest of the villains, leaving Izuku standing alone in the middle of the street. As Midoriya gets forced to retreat from Chisaki by a large amount of spikes that suddenly jut out of the concrete, the man finally notices Izuku. He takes in the green hair and seems to put something together. Even beneath the mask, Izuku could swear he sees the manic grin spread across his face. "You," he calls out. "He said you'd show your face eventually. The sickest of them all, the boy who inherited everything. I'm going to take such pleasure in remaking you." Chisaki slams his hand into the pavement, sending a wave of spikes barreling in his direction. Izuku steals his nerves and squares his body, then does the only thing he can. He runs. He can't fight this. There's no way. These guys work directly for All for One. They'll kill him, or worse. Don't run. We've not been introduced. A wall of concrete 3 stories high suddenly erects itself right in front of Izuku. He doesn't have time to stop, so he just uses more of One for All and crashes through it, tumbling onto the street beyond. Chisaki is still after him, and he stumbles to his feet and takes off again. Another wall forces him to turn, and he's backed into a corner against a burning shop. Izuku slowly inches back as the terrifying man approaches, chuckling. "Don't be afraid, child. It will all be over soon. Then, you will be freed of your curse." He launches barrage of tiny spikes towards Izuku, who does his best to dive out of the way. He gets nicked by a few, but most fly right past him. At just the last moment before the man can finish him off, Midoriya arrives and uses Black Whip to fling Chisaki back towards the burning cars and away from Izuku. "Get out of here," he shouts. Izuku is just about to comply when he hears wheezing coming from behind him. There's a woman, probably about the same age as his mom, coughing as she tries to drag herself out of the blazing storefront. Izuku rushes over to help her, and notices she has 3 concrete spikes sticking out of her, spikes meant for him. One of them is dangerously close to her heart. "Hold on, I'm coming. I'll get you some help," Izuku cries out. He scrambles to her side and picks her up with ease. She moans in pain as he does so. Sorry. he whispers. He ducks out of the door just before a large portion of the roof caves in, which would have surely killed them both. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 gently sets the woman down and begins to look over her wounds. The only problem is, he has no idea how to treat any of them. How does he keep her alive? Should he remove the spikes or leave them lodged in her chest? Young man, her voice is barely a whisper. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 leans over to hear her better, tears already welling up in his eyes. Are you a hero? What? No, I couldn't save you. I wasn't strong enough. I can't be. I'm not. She smiles up at him sadly. You did your best. I doubt there's anything more you could have done for me. I don't care how strong you are as long as you did all you could. You're on your way. You just have to keep going. The woman's eyes closed and her hand, which 𝐬𝐻𝐸 hadn't realized had come up to touch his cheek, fell to the ground. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 sat there and sobbed over her body. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 wasn't sure how he made it back to his apartment, but he saw the building and ran up to his room and shut the door. His mom wasn't even home, but he just wanted to be alone. It took a second, but every emotion, every piece of stress came crashing down on him in that instant. The desk lamp hit the wall first, then a shelf of comic books, and finally, a shelf full of his old notebooks hit the floor. Notebook No. 13 fell open. A large and very familiar signature scrawled across the pages. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 took one look at it and flung it out the window as hard as he could, listening as it whirled off into the distance. Good. He didn't ever want to see it again. He didn't deserve to. As quickly as it faded, the sound of the notebook flying back and caught him by surprise, and he just barely turned around in time to catch it as it flew back through the open window. Deku climbed through after it, and 𝐬𝐻𝐸 looked away, wiping at his eyes with his arm. Hey, bud, you okay? 𝐬𝐻𝐸 just kind of shook his head. Deku put his hand on his shoulder. I mean, we've all been there. For me, it was my mentor. For me, it was my father. For me, it was my best friend. Midoriya spoke up next. The hardest part about this job is, you can't always save everybody. Look, it was my fault. You wouldn't understand. Bakugo gave him a sympathetic look. 𝐬𝐻𝐸, we're probably the only people who do understand. He pulled 𝐬𝐻𝐸 in for a hug, and he just broke down into Bakugo's shoulder for a while. After a minute or two, he went to grab some tissues from the bathroom and came back to see only Deku in the room, with Bakugo crouched on the window frame. What's going on? Bakugo gave him that look. Bye, 𝐬𝐻𝐸. He jumped away. We came to say goodbye, Deku said, matter-of-factly. We can say goodbye at the Collider. You're not getting it. You're staying here. I need to be there, so you can all go home. They are going home, kid. I'm the only one staying. You're taking my place. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 looks at him puzzled, then puts it together. If you stay here, you'll die. You heard what that doctor said. I'm doing what needs to be done. I just wanted you to hear it from me. Well, what about your wife? Deku's face falls. Not everything works out, kid. Just stay here. That's not fair. You've got to tell them I can do this. It wasn't their decision. And damn, that stings. He figured out of everyone, Deku would be willing to give him a shot. I gotta make all for one pay. You have to let me make him pay. 𝐬𝐻𝐸, you're gonna get yourself killed. But I'm ready. I promise. No sooner than he gets the words out are his feet swept out from under him, and Deku is holding him up by only his shirt. Then electrocute me right now, or turn invisible on command so you can get past me. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 tries. Damn it, he tries. He basically screams with effort, but nothing happens. For a moment, he just hangs there, breathing heavily as Deku looks at him with sad eyes. Look, I know how much you want this, kid. He sets him down and walks over to the window. But you don't have it yet. I'm sorry. When will I know I'm ready? You won't. It's a leap of faith. That's all it is, 𝐬𝐻𝐸, a leap of faith. Deku turns and climbs out the window. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 doesn't stop him. Instead, he just stands there, watching as the other five swing off into the distance as the sun sets and darkness envelops the city. The sound of keys jingling in the front door knocks him out of his trance, and he can hear his mother walk in. Hi, 𝐬𝐻𝐸. She sees that his door is closed and walks up to it. I am not sure where you've been, baby, but I've been worried. She pauses and sighs. I know that your hero dying has been hard, 𝐬𝐻𝐸, but there's something I wanted to talk to you about. Something I wanted to say to you that I just never knew how to. Ever since you were born, you've been the light of my life. You were always so adamant that you'd be a hero, even though you were quirkless, and now it just hurts to see you so hurt, because you were always the one who comforted me when I wasn't doing well. There was something I said, something I told you all those years ago right after you were diagnosed. I think it's long past time I apologized for it. You saved me, 𝐬𝐻𝐸. You're my hero. You've always been my hero. And I think that if you want it badly enough, if you are so determined to be, then I think you can be. I think you will be everyone else's too. You can be a hero, 𝐬𝐻𝐸. 𝐬𝐻𝐸 tears open the door and embraces his mother, and the two sit weeping for quite some time. Eventually, 𝐬𝐻𝐸 gets up and puts on a hoodie. Where are you going, baby? Emerald sparks dance in 𝐬𝐻𝐸's eyes as an invisible hand grips the door handle. Taking a leap of faith. 𝐾RAKOOM. Heavy rain expected in 𝗬𝗎 over the next few hours as an unexpected thunderstorm rolls in from the east. The National Weather Service says this could shape up to be the biggest storm to hit Japan in decades, and it manifested only an hour ago. Stay tuned for updates on estimated rainfall and details on the high wind advisory right after this break. The wind whips and whistles between tips of the surrounding skyscrapers, drowning out the noise of the streets below with an eerie groan. Every gust threatens to hurl him down to the pavement below, and they only seem to be getting stronger. Even up this high, the pressure in the air felt like it was just building and building, ready to burst at any moment. The door lit up that neon UA and slid open before Izuku could even touch it. The elevator was ready and waiting. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Nezu and Eraserhead were standing at the monitor, already facing him as if his arrival was expected. The former grinned and took a sip out of his teacup. "Took you long enough." The sound of fabric rippling dominates his ears, and he pulls his hood tighter around his head. It's time to see if he's really ready for this. A new addition to the displays sat in the center of the room. The suit is all brilliant reds and blues, and the mask is reminiscent of the one Bakugo had been wearing, form-fitting with large, oblong eyes that came to a point near the nose and forehead. White lines run along the torso, splitting up the red and blue sections and converging at larger white circles on the shoulders and hips. It isn't even a question about whose it looks like it should be. Izuku gazes into the large, white eyes, and his own reflection stares right back at him, the suit behind it outlining his silhouette exactly. Izuku slides the mask over his face. It feels like he was always meant to wear it. He scoots closer to the edge of the building he's sitting on, and digs his fingers into the concrete to anchor himself. When do I know I'm a hero? He won't. He's completely hanging onto the side of the skyscraper now by just his fingers. The soles of his shoes squeak on the glass window right below him as he gets into a crouch. That's all it is, Izuku. A leap of faith. Crash! Little chunks of concrete and shards of glass explode into the sky. A little too much force on the jump, but oh well. Izuku uses his momentum to rotate until he's upside down, looking at the city above him. That floaty feeling in his stomach subsides as he passes the apex of his jump and starts to rise towards the skyline above. It's breathtakingly beautiful. The last embers of sunlight paint the sky a gorgeous mix of red and indigo as they die out, reflected on the bottoms of the stormy clouds. He flails a bit as the wind rushing by turns from a soft groan to a dissonant, high-pitched warbling as he picks up speed. Far below, people have started to notice the dark shape hurtling towards the ground. They stop and stare up in wonder, trying to catch a clear glimpse at the outlined figure in the flash of a lightning strike. His body straightens out, and Izuku narrows his eyes as he goes into a diving position, accelerating towards the ground even faster. "I had it made just for you. It fits perfectly," Eraserhead says with a hint of a smile. Izuku just looks around the lab for a moment, before his eyes land on exactly what he was looking for. A web line whips out and pulls 2 cans of spray paint into Izuku's hand. He looks at Eraserhead and smiles, then opens the case. At the last possible moment, 2 dark strands of web shoot up into the sky, whipping around in the wind for a harrowing second before attaching themselves to the top of the building. The newly christened hero flies across town, swinging back and forth above the streets. The feeling is still exhilarating like no other, and Izuku feels like he's high from just how much adrenaline is pumping through his veins. Between that and the fresh spray paint, he probably is, at least a little bit. Izuku flips and runs on walls at speeds he never even thought he could comprehend before, much less move at. He races alongside buses, swings over cars, and shoots through alleyways, bouncing off the walls until he reaches the building. The one he almost fell off, the one his dreams were shattered on before. Now, he doesn't even think about stopping. His sprint across rooftops turns into a dead sprint up the side of the building, using his webs to keep himself close to it as his powerful legs propel him upwards. One final leap sends him far into the air, and he twists around and fires 2 web lines, each latching onto one side of the hole in the railing he created before. WOOO. Izuku pulls as hard as he can, willing the webs to stretch, and he slingshots himself through the gap, somersaulting into a landing on top of the building across the way. Finally, he stops and jerks his mask off his face. Fog clouds in front of him as he pants to catch his breath, the sweet, familiar burn of the frigid air setting his throat and lungs ablaze. He's so delirious and hyped up right now that he could laugh like a maniac, but all he can get out is a hoarse chuckle. He stands back up, pulls the mask down again, and leaps off towards the old subway entrance.